Okay, let's talk numbers for a second. Depending on where you look, it's somewhere between, 81% and maybe even 92% of New Year's resolutions, they fail.
That's right. It's a staggering statistic, isn't it?
It really is.
Yeah.
Think about that. At least 8 times out of 10, maybe even 9, you're statistically more likely to just fall back into your old ways, your old habits, than you are to actually stick with a new behavior, no matter how much you want it.
Even with the best intentions.
Does that sound familiar to you listening? I mean, have you ever felt like you're really trying, you're putting in the effort, you're feeling motivated, maybe for a week, maybe a month?
Or sometimes just a couple of days.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then you just slide back, right back into what you were doing before.
Yeah.
And it feels awful, right? Like a personal failure.
It does. But the thing is, you are absolutely not alone in that feeling. Behavior change is genuinely hard. It challenges these patterns that are, deeply ingrained in us.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we are really digging into this. Why do our biggest, most important habit goals often just fail? And more importantly, what can we actually learn from those setbacks to finally build habits that stick around?
We've pulled together a whole stack of really fascinating sources for this. We've got rigorous research papers from behavioral psychology experts.
Right, the heavy hitters.
Yeah, and insightful articles from writers who've really explored the practical side, the science of self-improvement, plus some personal reflections, too, people talking honestly about overcoming the hurdles.
So our mission here is basically to cut through all the noise, pull out the most valuable stuff, maybe uncover some surprising facts about how our brains even work when it comes to habits.
And understand not just the common mistakes, though, we'll definitely cover those, but the powerful lessons learned. What actually helps on the journey to building better, more resilient habits.
Exactly. It's about giving you a shortcut, really. Getting you well-informed on this super crucial and, let's be honest, often incredibly frustrating topic of making changes last.
Okay, so where should we start? Maybe unpack some of those common reasons our best intentions seem to fall short almost immediately.
Yeah, let's do that. The pitfalls. The things behavioral experts see tripping people up constantly. Understanding these is probably the first step to avoiding them, right?
Absolutely. And the first one, arguably maybe the most significant trap that so many of us fall into, is simply trying to change too much, too soon.
Oh, this one feels so relatable. I think everyone knows this feeling.
It's like the behavioral equivalent of trying to sprint a marathon. You might start out feeling strong, full of energy.
But you're just not going to finish.
Unlikely, yeah.
It's that January 1st feeling, isn't it? Or maybe it's the start of a new week, a new job, and suddenly you've got this huge, ambitious list. You're going to run 5 miles daily, meditate for an hour every single morning, learn Mandarin for 2 hours every night, completely cut out sugar and processed foods, like immediately. Oh, and wake up at 5 a.m.
All at once.
All at once.
Yeah.
You feel this surge of energy. You're ready to conquer the world.
And the sources we looked at are incredibly clear on why this rarely works. Behavior change researchers pretty much universally agree that our capacity for conscious, effortful change is limited. It's a finite resource.
Right.
So when you try to juggle multiple new behaviors at the same time, especially behaviors that demand focus, discipline, willpower, you're just rapidly burning through that limited pool of mental energy.
So it's like a cognitive overload issue.
Yeah.
Your brain literally doesn't have the bandwidth to track and execute 5 completely new, challenging things simultaneously.
That's exactly it. You spread your resources way too thin. The sources really emphasize focusing on a very small number of habits at the same time.
Okay, how small is very small? Are we talking like 2, 3?
Well, the absolute highest suggestion you'll typically find, especially coming from researchers like B.J. Fogg at Stanford, who's famous for his tiny habits work, maybe 3 habits at once, maybe.
Okay.
But, and this is the crucial, vital caveat, these have to be incredibly tiny habits.
Okay, incredibly tiny, definitely needs some definition. What does that actually look like? Give me an example.
We're talking habits so small, they almost feel, well, negligible, almost silly sometimes, like flossing just one tooth instead of your whole mouth.
One tooth? Seriously?
Seriously. Or doing a single push-up, or maybe just one squat, saying just one positive phrase when you wake up. If your new habits are literally that minuscule, then yeah, maybe you can manage 3 at once, because they require almost zero conscious effort or willpower.
Okay, I get it. They're almost symbolic actions at that point.
Pretty much. But anything beyond those truly tiny, almost effortless actions.
It just gets overwhelming really fast.
Precisely. For anything more substantial, The clear lesson learned from all the sources is that it's usually profoundly more effective to focus all your energy on building just one new behavior, pour everything into that one thing until it genuinely becomes automatic, until it feels like it's just part of your normal routine.
And we saw a really powerful example of this kind of sequential focus in the material, didn't we? Someone shared their personal strategy,
Yes, that was a great illustration.
highlighting the patience it took. They didn't try to overhaul everything at once. They spent, 6 months? Focusing only on getting to the gym consistently, just 3 days a week.
6 months on just that one thing.
Right. Making sure it felt solid, like it was just part of their lifestyle, non-negotiable. Only after it felt totally routine did they even think about adding something new, which for them was writing a new article twice a week.
And they dedicated another significant chunk of time to that, right? About 8 months.
Yeah, 8 months just for embedding that writing habit. And only then did they consider adding something else, like I think it was daily flossing.
That intense, singular focus over an extended period, that's really key. It's like building a wall, brick by brick. You lay one brick, make sure it's solid, let the mortar set, then you add the next one.
It feels slower in the moment, maybe less exciting than the big overhaul.
But it's exponentially more likely to actually lead to lasting change. You're building a solid foundation.
So if you're listening right now and you feel like you're constantly starting over, always overwhelmed by this mental checklist of new habits you think you should be doing, maybe just pause. Ask yourself honestly, are you trying to fix your diet, start daily exercise, learn a new language, and meditate all at the same time?
If the answer is yes, well, this research strongly suggests that might be exactly why it feels impossible, why none of them seem to stick.
The advice is clear. Scale way, way back. Pick one.
Another major pitfall the sources really highlight is that we often get totally fixated on seeking a result instead of falling in love with the ritual.
Okay, this one resonates deeply with me. I think a lot of people will feel this. We get laser focused on the shiny outcome, right? Losing those 20 pounds.
Yeah.
Finally finishing the novel. Reading, 50 books by the end of the year.
Yeah, that distant destination, the big end goal, it dominates our thinking, our motivation.
But it's not the habit itself.
Exactly. And while goals are obviously important, they give us direction, the sources emphasize again and again that it's the process, the repeated action, the daily or weekly ritual that actually gets you there. And more importantly, that's what transforms a behavior into a genuine habit.
Goals are about the future outcome.
Habits are about the present process, what you do today.
There was a great quote in the material from Tony Schwartz, who writes a lot about human performance. He said, "A ritual is a highly precise behavior you do at a specific time so that it becomes automatic over time and no longer requires much conscious intention or energy."
That quote has a vital clue baked right into it, and it links back to the psychology we'll get into later. The real power of a ritual is that through consistent repetition, it becomes automatic.
Automaticity, the holy grail of habits.
Right. And as we'll discuss, automatic behaviors don't drain that limited willpower we were just talking about. So if you truly want a new habit to stick, you need to shift your focus. You genuinely need to fall in love with a new ritual, as one source put it.
So stop obsessing about, say, being able to do 50 push-ups.
And instead, focus on the tiny, repeatable action. Maybe just starting with 5 push-ups, or even 2. But doing it consistently, every single day, maybe right after you brush your teeth, or triggered by some other existing routine. That small, consistent action is the ritual.
Yeah, the examples shared in the sources make this distinction really clear. Like, you want to read more. Forget aiming for a book a week right out of the gate. That's a result goal. Instead, focus on the ritual. Commit to reading just 2 pages every single night before bed. That's small, it's repeatable, it's linked to a specific time and place.
Or meditation. Don't aim for 30 minutes immediately. That's daunting. Start with a ritual of just 1 minute each morning. Maybe right after you pour your coffee, just 60 seconds.
And then maybe after a month, once that 1 minute feels totally automatic, maybe then you increase it to 2 or 3.
Exactly. The power isn't in hitting some huge number on day one. It's in consistently doing the small thing, embedding the ritual itself.
So it's a fundamental shift in mindset then. Are you constantly checking the scale, feeling bummed out because the number isn't dropping fast enough?
Or are you focused on just doing the daily thing? Getting that workout in today, reading those 2 pages tonight, doing that 1 minute of meditation.
Because that's where the habit is actually built. That's where the energy needs to go.
Precisely. Okay, so we've got trying too much at once, which drains our limited resources, and focusing on the outcome over the process. which misses the point that habits are built through repeatable rituals. What's next on this list of common failures?
Yeah, not changing your environment. This one seems huge.
It really is. The sources suggest it's incredibly difficult, maybe even bordering on impossible, to consistently stick to positive new habits if your environment is actively working against you.
Like if it's constantly nudging you back towards the old behaviors you're trying to ditch.
Exactly.
Right.
Like trying to stick to a healthy diet when your kitchen counters are overflowing with easy-to-grab chips and cookies.
While the apples and carrots are hidden away in the crisper drawer at the bottom of the fridge. Out of sight, out of mind.
Precisely. Your environment is just packed with cues, visual cues, sounds, social cues that strongly influence your behavior, often without you even realizing it.
So if the cues in your space are constantly triggering your old unwanted habits, or they make your new desired habits really difficult or inconvenient to perform,
You're fighting this constant uphill battle. You're relying purely on willpower, which we know is limited.
So the lesson learned here, and this is something reinforced by experts like James Clear, whose work came up, is that you need to actively build an environment that makes the good habits easier, more obvious, and makes the bad habits harder, less attractive.
You have to consciously design your surroundings to support the behaviors you want.
Think about your own space right now as you're listening. Does it make the habit you want easy or hard? Is your water bottle always full and sitting right next to you, or is it empty over by the sink?
Is your workout gear laid out the night before, ready to go? Or is it stuffed in a bag in the back of the closet?
Is the book you want to read sitting on your bedside table, maybe on top of your phone? Or is your phone the last thing you see before you try to sleep?
These small, deliberate changes to your physical space can have a massive impact on whether a behavior happens automatically or not. Even if the specific sources for this deep dive didn't give us, 100 specific examples for every possible scenario.
Right, they didn't lay out exactly how to redesign your kitchen.
No, but they strongly emphasize the principle. Your environment matters hugely. You have to shape your world to support the identity you're trying to build, make the good choice the easy choice.
Okay, what's next? Another big pitfall seems to be chasing these huge, impressive achievements right away instead of focusing on and celebrating the small wins.
Yes. There's this common assumption, maybe it's unconscious, that to make a real difference, your efforts have to be massive from day one. They need to be noticeable, maybe even Instagram-worthy.
Yeah, that feeds right back into setting those crazy, unreasonable starting points we talked about.
Yeah.
If I want to be a serious writer, I need to write for 8 hours straight starting today.
Or if I want to get in amazing shape, I need to hit the gym for 2 hours, do 100 push-ups, 100 sit-ups, run a 10K right now.
And the sources just completely counter this with a fundamental truth about how change actually happens. Nearly every habit you currently have, good or bad, whether it's daily exercise or biting your nails, it's the result of many, many small choices repeated over a long time.
It's not the intensity of any single action that builds the habit. It's the repeated pattern, the consistency of those small behaviors that accumulates and compounds into significant, often life-changing results.
We tend to overlook or totally discount those tiny daily choices, right? The ones that make us just 1% better or maybe 1% worse.
But those are the choices that really matter over weeks, months, and years. That's the power of compounding.
So the lesson learned here, and it really reinforces and adds depth to that start small idea, is crucial. Start with something so incredibly small it feels almost insignificant. Something that seems genuinely easy and totally reasonable to do every single day.
Focus relentlessly on building the consistent behavior itself first. Just show up, make it stick no matter what. Then, and only then, once it's truly ingrained, can you gradually start to increase the intensity or the duration or the difficulty.
Right. Build the root, then worry about the branches.
Exactly. Those examples we keep coming back to, 5 push-ups, 2 pages of reading, 1 minute of meditation. They aren't just random, easy starting points. They perfectly illustrate starting small and reasonable.
Contrast that with the unreasonable habits mentioned in some sources, like trying to jump straight into reading 8 hours a day or doing 100 push-ups and running a 10K daily from scratch.
It's just a recipe for failure, not just temporary failure, but for burnout, discouragement, and reinforcing that negative belief that says, see, I knew I couldn't do this. I'm just not cut out for change.
So if your new habit feels daunting today, if just the thought of doing it makes you want to procrastinate or feel overwhelmed, stop. Ask yourself, is it because I'm trying to start too big? Am I aiming for some huge achievement instead of just a tiny, consistent action?
Can you break it down? Find one Microscopic, achievable step you can genuinely commit to doing today, and then tomorrow, and the day after that. That's the path.
Okay, the next pitfall sources brought up is one that actually surprised me a little. It seems counterintuitive, keeping your habits private.
Yeah, this one goes against what many people might think.
Right. I would assume keeping it quiet means less pressure if you mess up. You
Yeah.
can just sort of quietly abandon ship and nobody knows. Less embarrassment.
That's the common logic, the perceived safety of secrecy. But one source made a really strong argument that making an obligation just to yourself is actually quite weak. It becomes significantly easier and more powerful when other people are aware of it. When your habit efforts are hidden, when you only have to answer to yourself, there's dramatically less accountability. It's just much, much easier to quit without anyone noticing or, frankly, caring.
So it's about leveraging the power of social proof
Mm.
and external accountability, making it about more than just you.
Exactly. Sharing your goal publicly, even in a really simple way, puts a little bit of your reputation on the line. It taps into something deep within us, maybe an evolutionary thing. We humans are naturally bothered by the idea of social disapproval or looking inconsistent to our tribe, our peers.
Okay, that makes sense. It raises the stakes.
It does. It makes quitting harder because there's potential social cost, even if it's just mild embarrassment. And conversely, can make staying motivated easier because you might get social reinforcement, maybe praise for sticking with it, or at least the desire to avoid perceived failure in the eyes of others.
The author of one source shared a really vivid personal example of using this. They wanted to build a habit of editing 3 photos every single day for their blog. And to create that accountability, they didn't just track it privately in a notebook. They shared their daily progress using a public Google Doc that was linked right there on their social media.
Wow, that's quite public.
Totally. Everyone who followed them could literally click the link and see. Did they hit their goal today? Yes or no? Missing a day meant letting down not just themselves, but potentially their readers who are following along, expecting those updates.
It creates that external pressure, that sort of gentle social fiction against quitting. It reinforces the internal desire and just makes the habit stickier.
So it's worth considering carefully. Have you told anyone about your new habit goal? Could sharing it maybe just with one trusted friend or a family member, or even joining a small online group focused on that specific habit, could that make a real difference in your consistency? It adds a layer of accountability that can be surprisingly powerful.
And flowing directly from that idea of accountability and knowing if you're succeeding, the next common mistake we see people make time and time again is simply not tracking the change.
The classic what gets measured gets managed principle.
Exactly, attributed to Peter Drucker, and it applies perfectly to habits.
It seems obvious, but forgetting, or maybe actively choosing not, to track your progress is such a common way to get demotivated and eventually just drift away from a habit.
You lose that vital reference information, don't you? You need it to see if your approach is actually working, maybe tweak things if it's not, and maybe even more importantly, you can't actually see how far you've come. You miss the visual proof of your consistency.
That visual proof feels really important for motivation, seeing a chain of successes.
Absolutely. Tracking, formally recording your progress in some tangible way is a powerful, evidence-based method for building habits. It gives you immediate feedback, it provides a visual representation of your consistency, which can be incredibly motivating, especially on those days when you just don't feel like doing the habit.
Seeing that unbroken chain on your calendar can be a powerful motivator not to break it.
Definitely. The sources suggest something as simple as keeping a journal or a notebook specifically for this purpose. Having one dedicated place to record your progress, mark your wins, even just a simple check mark or an X on a calendar, and maybe even note setbacks or challenges, it makes the commitment feel more real, more concrete.
The physical act of writing it down or seeing that mark on a calendar every day, it somehow solidifies it in your mind, doesn't it? It makes it harder to just rationalize skipping a day.
It really does. It creates that visual chain of wins you become invested in not breaking. So think about it logically. How will you truly know if you're making consistent progress if you aren't tracking it reliably? How will you celebrate those small wins that add up? How will you see the overall pattern emerge?
Find a simple, consistent way to mark your adherence. Doesn't need to be fancy, just a quick record that confirms I did the thing today.
And finally, the last common pitfall that emerged from the sources is this tendency we have to try and completely reinvent the wheel.
Right. Thinking we have to figure it all out ourselves.
Yeah, maybe it's pride, maybe it's a desire for originality, but we often think we need to discover the absolute best, most unique way to build a habit entirely on our own, learning everything through our own painful trial and error.
And inevitably making all the same mistakes that literally thousands, maybe millions of people before us have already made, documented, and learned from.
Precisely. One source offered this wonderfully pragmatic perspective, basically saying, if you want to know what an experience is going to be like, find someone similarly situated and ask for their experience.
That sounds simple.
It is, the source went on. A very good way to avoid failure is to learn on someone else's dime. Let them make the mistakes and then learn from those mistakes. I much prefer learning from other people's mistakes than from my own.
That's just such practical, grounded advice. It almost sounds too simple, but it's actually profound when you think about how much time and energy it could save.
Exactly. The lesson learned here is crystal clear. Don't hesitate. Leverage the collective wisdom, the experience of others who have already walked the path you're starting on.
So find someone who has successfully built a habit similar to the one you're aiming for.
Yeah. Reach out to them. Ask them about their journey. What were the biggest hurdles they faced? What strategies surprisingly worked well for them? What did they try that completely bombed? How did they handle setbacks?
Don't try to navigate it blindfolded when there's this wealth of experience just waiting to be tapped into.
Read books. Listen to deep dives like this one. Find online communities dedicated to the habit. Talk to people you know personally. Learn from their successes and their failures. It's a huge shortcut.
Okay, so those are some of the big, practical, and largely avoidable reasons our habit goals often falter right at the surface level. But the sources we looked at also dug into some really fascinating, deeper psychology behind why habits form and fail, particularly this complex, often misunderstood relationship between habits and willpower.
Right. This is where we move beyond just the practical tips and look at the underlying mechanisms in the brain. Academic research really highlights that habits aren't primarily conscious decisions we make over and over because we choose to in that moment.
They're not acts of deliberate choice each time.
Not really, not once they're established.
Yeah.
At their core, habits are repeated responses that become automatically triggered by specific cues in our environment.
So it's less about thinking, okay, time for habit X, and more like, oh, cue Y just happened, therefore I automatically launch into routine Z.
Exactly. And these cues can be incredibly varied. They can be specific locations like walking into your kitchen.
Or times of day like 5 p.m. rolling around.
Right. Or interactions with certain people, seeing a friend might trigger a specific behavior. Or even just prior actions in a sequence, like finishing dinner automatically leads you to reach for dessert, or grab the TV remote.
Like walking into the kitchen first thing and automatically reaching to the coffee maker before your brain is even fully online.
Perfect example.
Or sitting down in that specific spot on the couch after work and automatically picking up your phone to scroll social media without even consciously deciding, I want to scroll now.
Precisely. And here's the critical point that links back to why trying too much at once fails, or why relying only on goals doesn't work. Because habits are triggered externally by these environmental cues, they don't heavily rely on our finite, easily depleted self-control resources. They don't really need conscious willpower once they're automatic.
So the trigger, the impetus, as one source called it, is basically outsourced to the context, to the environment.
In a very real sense, yes. Your brain is conserving energy by putting that behavior on autopilot, triggered by the situation.
We saw a really interesting study example that illustrated this environmental link quite clearly. Researchers looked at habitual runners.
I remember this one.
And they found that these runners were faster to recognize running-related words like jog or trail when they were first shown words related to the location where they usually run words like park or gym.
Okay.
But, and this is the key part, they were not any faster to recognize those running words when they were primed with words related to their personal goals for running, like weight or health or fitness.
Ah, that's fascinating. So the habit, the automatic response, was more strongly linked to the place than the reason.
Exactly. It strongly suggests the habit itself is more directly tied to the environmental cue, the context where it's performed, rather than being constantly driven by you consciously thinking about your goals or motivations in that specific moment. The habit gets tied to the where and when, not necessarily the why.
Right. The automatic habit mechanism seems largely blind to the goal you originally set it up for. It's primarily hooked into the environmental cue that triggers the learned response. And this leads us to a truly surprising, almost counterintuitive finding about what happens when our willpower gets low.
Okay, so we know from decades of psychology research that using self-control is tiring, right? Forcing yourself to study for a tough exam, resisting tempting food, suppressing strong emotions, making complex decisions, all that stuff depletes our willpower.
It's like a muscle. It gets fatigued after intense use. We have less ability to control impulses or start effortful actions afterward. That's the standard, widely accepted concept of ego depletion.
Right. Limited resource. Gets used up.
That's the standard view, and it holds true. But here's where the sources, particularly drawing from some really cutting-edge research, notably out of USC, reveal something much more nuanced and really interesting. When your willpower is low, when you're mentally tired, stressed out, feeling depleted, studies show people actually become more locked into repeating their habits.
Wait, more locked in? That feels completely backward. You'd think when you're tired, you'd just kind of give up on everything, good habits and bad. You'd be less likely to do any strong behavior, surely.
That's the intuitive leap most people make, yeah. But the research reveals a different, more complex pattern. The finding isn't just that low willpower makes you fail at conscious, goal-directed behavior. It actually seems to boost the performance of your strong habits.
Boost.
Yeah. And crucially, this applies equally to habits that are desirable or goal-congruent and those that are undesirable or goal-incongruent. If a behavior is strongly habitual for you, being depleted makes you more likely to do it.
Wow. Okay, this is profoundly important for understanding why we seem to revert to old patterns, especially when we're stressed or tired. We need to walk through those study examples because they really make this clear.
Okay, let's do it. Study 1 tracked MBA students over a 10-week period, specifically including their high-stress exam weeks, when you can assume their willpower was pretty severely depleted.
Right, peak stress time.
And the students who had already established strong habits for eating certain breakfast foods or reading specific sections of the newspaper, they showed a statistically significant increase in performing those strong habits during the stressful exam weeks compared to the calmer, non-exam weeks.
An increase. Not just staying the same, but doing it more.
An increase. And this effect applied equally to strong habits that were, normatively judged as relatively healthful, like eating cold cereal or reading the local news, and those judged as less healthful, like eating pastries or reading advice columns.
So if they had a strong, ingrained habit for something, being stressed and tired didn't make them abandon it. It actually made them more likely to default straight to it, regardless of whether it was a good habit or a bad one.
That's what the data showed. It strongly suggests habits are the brain's automatic fallback system when conscious control resources are low.
Okay, that's fascinating. What about study 2? That used a different method, right?
Yeah, study 2 used a more direct willpower depletion task. They had participants spend a significant amount of time doing everyday activities using their non-dominant hand.
Oh, that sounds frustratingly effortful.
Yeah.
You'd constantly have to consciously override your automatic impulse.
Exactly. It requires constant conscious effort and inhibition. And when participants were depleted by this task, they were significantly more likely to perform behaviors they had previously listed as being strongly habitual for them.
And again, did it matter if the habits were good or bad?
Nope. Same pattern. It held true for both strong habits. They listed as congruent with their personal goals, things like studying or exercising, and strong habits they listed as incongruent with their goals, like watching TV or using social media too much.
Wow. So the depletion didn't necessarily make them fail at their goals across the board, but it seemed to funnel their behavior towards whatever their strongest habits happened to be, regardless of how those habits actually lined up with their stated intentions at that moment.
That's what it looks like. Studies 3 and 4 then specifically zoomed in on snack choices after different depleting tasks. One was a stressful exam. Another was a difficult writing task that required inhibiting repetitive words.
Okay, common scenarios for feeling drained.
Right. And participants who were mentally depleted by these tasks were significantly more likely to choose snacks that they had a strong habit of eating. And again, it didn't matter if that habitual snack was objectively healthy or unhealthy.
So if your go-to stress snack habit is chips, depletion makes you reach for chips. But if your go-to stress snack habit is apples, depletion makes you reach for apples.
Yep. That's precisely the finding. The depletion amplified the habit, regardless of its health value.
And crucially, these studies also consistently found that low willpower had very little impact on behaviors that were only weakly habitual.
Right. It was specifically the strong, well-established automatic habits that got this boost or became the default response when willpower was running low. New, Fragile habits, the ones still requiring conscious effort and attention, those were the first casualties when people got depleted.
The research also shed light on why this happens, didn't it? It wasn't just that people suddenly wanted the bad habits more.
No, that's a key point. Mediation analysis in Study 4, which tries to unpack the psychological steps between the cause, depletion, and the effect, habitual behavior, suggested it's not because depleted people suddenly start valuing the bad habits more, or because they evaluate the options differently. For instance, their stated preferences for snacks or their ratings of snack healthfulness didn't change when they were depleted.
Okay, so what was driving it then?
The analysis pointed towards the effect being driven simply by an increased tendency to unthinkingly repeat past choices. It seems willpower is primarily needed to override an automatic habit response, to interrupt the autopilot. It's not necessarily needed to generate a desired, goal-directed behavior from scratch, especially when there's a strong competing habit available.
So when willpower is low, that override function is impaired.
And the automatic habit just takes over, unchallenged.
This totally reframes that common experience, doesn't it? Reaching for the junk food, biting your nails, endlessly scrolling through your phone when you're feeling stressed or tired or overwhelmed.
It really does. It might not be a fundamental lack of desire for your health goals or your productivity goals. It might simply be that your capacity for conscious override, your willpower, is just too low in that moment to interrupt the automatic, strong habit response that's been triggered by the stress or fatigue.
And this pattern isn't just about temporary dips in willpower from a bad day or a tough task, is it? The research also looked at individual differences in trait self-control.
Right. Study 5 looked at chronic, or trait, self-control basically, how much self-discipline a person typically has as part of their personality. And the finding was that people who naturally have lower trait self-control tend to rely more heavily on their stronger habits to pursue their goals and just navigate their daily lives, compared to people with higher trait self-control.
So if you're someone who generally finds conscious self-regulation more challenging, you might be more likely to fall back on your most ingrained habits as your main strategy for getting things done or coping with situations.
That seems to be the implication. Even if those habits aren't actually the most effective or healthy ways to achieve those goals in the long run, your system is just more reliant on the automatic pilot.
They saw this in a study on exam preparation, right? Study 5 again. Students with lower trait self-control spend a greater proportion of their study time using methods that were strong habits for them, like maybe rereading notes in a very specific, familiar way.
Compared to students with higher trait self-control, who tended to use a wider variety of study methods, including strategies that might have been weaker habits for them, or ones that required more conscious planning and effort.
So if you sometimes feel like you get stuck in the same old routine ways of doing things, especially when you're facing a goal or feeling under pressure, it could be linked to this deeper reliance on strong habits as a fallback when conscious effort feels limited, whether that limit is temporary because you're tired, state, or more consistent because of your baseline trait.
Yeah, the research fundamentally suggests that habits function as this kind of default method, a fallback response that our brains use, particularly when our conscious self-control resources are running low.
Which actually is pretty adaptive when you think about it. It's how we manage to function at all, how we adhere to any routine in daily life, despite the constant barrage of demands on our limited willpower. Imagine if every single action required full conscious effort.
We'd be exhausted by 9 a.m. So it's a powerful reframing. Habits aren't just these automatic actions that sort of happen to us. They are a fundamental energy-conserving part of our self-regulation toolkit, and they become absolutely critical when we're depleted.
So the key takeaway then isn't necessarily just wishing you had more willpower.
Good luck with that.
Right, but rather focusing your energy on deliberately building good, healthy habits. Habits that can serve as this reliable, positive fallback response when life inevitably gets challenging and your conscious resources are strained. Make the good thing the automatic thing.
Building directly on that understanding, one source we looked at argues that a core, perhaps often overlooked, reason we fail to make positive habits stick goes even deeper than these mechanics of willpower and automaticity. It's about focusing primarily on the outcome instead of focusing on who we are becoming.
Ah, the power of identity. This feels really important.
It's potentially transformative.
So the idea is to shift your main motivation, your core focus, away from purely outcome-based habits like I want to read 50 books this year or I want to lose 20 pounds.
And shift towards identity-based habits. Things like, I want to become a curious, continuous learner, or I want to become a healthy, active person.
The real goal isn't just hitting a number or achieving a specific result. The deeper, more sustainable goal is to become the type of person who naturally performs the desired behavior because it aligns with how they see themselves. It's part of their self-image.
Exactly. So if you want to be a writer, the real lasting goal isn't just finishing one book someday. It's becoming a person who writes daily because that's who they are. That's their identity.
I love that extreme historical example mentioned in one source, Victor Hugo, working on The Hunchback of Notre Dame. Apparently, he had his valet lock away all his clothes.
Right. So he couldn't go outside?
Exactly. Forcing himself to stay inside and write. Now, that's obviously extreme, but it's such a clear illustration of creating a rigid system specifically designed to support the identity of being a writer. It made the desired behavior the only practical option.
It sounds simple, this shift from what I do to who I am, but adopting and really living into a new identity is challenging. It's hard precisely because it requires you to consistently do things differently than your old identity would have done.
And you have to actively stop yourself from performing the familiar, ingrained habits of that old self, right?
Yeah.
Because those old habits are like these deep grooves, these well-worn paths in your brain from years and years of repetition.
You're essentially battling your own psychological muscle memory, the automatic triggers associated with your former self-image.
Exactly. But the good news is the sources give some really powerful, practical ways to actively reinforce this new identity you're trying to build.
Okay, let's hear them.
First, revisit that idea of starting small, but look at it through this new lens of identity. Every single time you perform that tiny action related to your new habit, it's not just a small step towards some distant goal. It's a piece of evidence. It's a vote that reinforces your belief in the person you are becoming.
Ah, I like that framing. A vote for your new identity.
Yeah. So when you read those 2 pages tonight, you're not just reading, you're casting a vote for being a curious learner. When you do that one push-up, you're voting for being an active person. You can literally say to yourself, hey, I did my 1 push-up today, and I chose the healthy snack. Look at me. I'm becoming a healthy person. Each tiny, consistent action builds psychological proof for your desired identity.
So the tiny habits aren't just about making it easy to get started. They are fundamentally about accumulating undeniable psychological evidence that you are this new type of person. Consistency, even in minuscule actions, builds belief.
Precisely. Okay, second, create systems that make the desired behavior easier and the undesired behavior harder, specifically to reinforce that identity. Think back to Victor Hugo locking his clothes away in extreme system.
Or focusing on setting up your daily writing system, like having a specific time, a dedicated place, your tools ready to go, rather than just obsessing about the outcome of the finished book.
Right. Design your environment, your daily structure, to make the behavior that supports your new identity the obvious, easy default path.
Okay, start small as votes, build symptoms. What's third?
Third, find supportive people and communities. This is huge. Join groups, clubs, online communities where the desired behavior and the desired identity are the norm, where people celebrate those actions and identify that way.
This helps counteract that interesting concept called mimetic desire, right? Where we unconsciously start wanting things or imitating habits just because everyone around us seems to be doing it or wanting it.
Exactly. If everyone in your running group identifies as a runner and talks about training plans and upcoming races, it makes it so much easier for you to identify as a runner yourself and naturally adopt the associated habits. The identity becomes socially reinforced.
And this ties back beautifully to the keeping habits private pitfall we discussed earlier. Sharing your journey with supportive people who share or encourage that identity reinforces it and provides that crucial positive social feedback when you act in alignment with it.
Absolutely. And linking back to the psychology of willpower again, giving your habits a stronger, deeper why, one that's explicitly tied to your desired identity, makes you dramatically more likely to defend those activities, to prioritize them when life gets busy or stressful.
Because they aren't just tasks on a list anymore.
Exactly. They become expressions of who you are. You defend them like you defend your sense of self.
The author of one source shared a really compelling personal story about this. They were incredibly frustrated with mindlessly wasting hours scrolling social media. Initially, they tried to frame their goal simply as being more productive.
Which sounds reasonable, but maybe a bit vague.
Right. It felt vague, and it lacked a strong emotional pull. They kept getting drawn back into the online time sinks. The real lasting change apparently happened almost instantly when they clarified their deeper why and stated their desired identity much more powerfully. They realized they wanted to be a writer.
Ah, that's much more specific and evocative than just productive.
Exactly. That specific identity-based goal provided a powerful why that immediately created a stark conflict with passively browsing social media. They had this realization, wait, if I want to do something interesting with my own life as a writer, I need to stop just watching other people do interesting things in their lives online.
That's a powerful insight. The conflict becomes unavoidable.
Right. And when that identity-based realization clicked, the conflict was so clear that they found it remarkably easy to leave social media almost instantly. And then, as their writing improved and they started getting positive feedback, it further reinforced their evolving identity as a writer, which in turn solidified the associated habits.
It perfectly illustrates that James Clear, quote, cited in the sources. The more pride you have in a particular aspect of your identity, the more motivated you will be to maintain the habits associated with it.
Your habits stop being just tasks on a to-do list. They become a core, defended extension of who you are and who you're actively becoming.
This really is a powerful shift in perspective. It's not just about doing something different. It's about being someone different and then letting your daily habits become the tangible proof and the reinforcement of that new identity.
Okay, but even with all this understanding, knowing the pitfalls, understanding the psychology, focusing on identity, we're still human, right? Life happens. We will face setbacks.
Absolutely. You'll miss a day. Maybe you'll miss a whole week.
Yeah.
Maybe longer sometimes. Things get in the way.
So the sources also offered some really crucial insights on how to navigate failure, how to bounce back, and how to build resilience when you inevitably get off track.
Because it's incredibly common and maybe feels almost automatic to feel terrible when that happens. Guilty. Like a complete failure. You miss a day or fall off track with a new habit you were working so hard on.
And the immediate thought is often, well, I've ruined it now. There's no point trying again.
Yeah. One author shared their own really painful experience of missing a blog post deadline because they procrastinated and the crushing guilt that followed. It's a very relatable feeling.
That feeling of disappointment, maybe shame or guilt, it's a normal human response. But the sources offer a really vital perspective shift here. There was probably a valid reason you went off track in that specific moment.
It wasn't necessarily just a failure of character.
Probably not. Think about stress, for instance. Stress has profound impacts on our bodies and minds in ways that directly affect our motivation, our decision-making capacity, our ability to exert conscious control. Our ancient stress mechanisms weren't really designed for the chronic low-level buzz of modern life. They were built for immediate physical threats, like running from a tiger.
Right. Fight or flight, not deal with 300 emails.
Exactly. So when those systems get activated inappropriately by modern stressors, they can manifest in ways that limit our capacity for the kind of high-level cognitive function we need to stick to new, effortful habits.
So that moment where you failed to do the habit, where you slipped up, it might not have been a moral failing at all. It might have been your body and mind responding to stress or depletion or other factors in a way that significantly compromised your ability to exert conscious override at that specific time.
Your willpower tank was empty. The automatic fallback habit, maybe the old comfortable one, took over because it required less energy.
Yes. So the critical lesson learned here is to actively work against that immediate urge for harsh self-criticism. Instead, try to accept that this response, the failure to perform the new habit, might have been what your body or mind genuinely needed or simply defaulted to in that moment, given the circumstances.
By honoring that need, perhaps, for rest, or acknowledging the sheer power of the default behavior when you're under stress, rather than just beating yourself up relentlessly, you're actually doing yourself a favor in the long run. Forgive yourself for the mistake, for the slip-up. Recognize it as a moment of your human system responding under pressure.
This connects directly back to all that willpower research we discussed. If you were under unusual stress, maybe you were seriously underslept, dealing with some emotional turmoil, or just mentally wiped out from a demanding day, your ability to override the old automatic behavior, like doom scrolling or reaching for comfort food, or to initiate the new, still fragile habit, was simply severely compromised right then.
Exactly. So instead of defaulting to that harsh inner critic, I'm so lazy, I just have no discipline, pause. Ask yourself why the setback likely happened. Was it the crushing mental load of that big project deadline? Were you running on fumes after multiple nights of bad sleep? Did you have a difficult emotional conversation that just drained you? Were you exposed to a really strong environmental cue you hadn't anticipated?
Understanding the likely underlying reason, linking it to stress or depletion rather than some fundamental character flaw, allows for self-compassion. And crucially, it gives you valuable information you can use to plan better for the future. Maybe anticipate those triggers or build in more buffers.
It shifts the focus from blame, I'm bad, to strategic problem solving. Okay, that situation depleted me. How can I handle it differently next time?
This understanding of how deeply ingrained habits are and how they function as these automatic fallbacks is also incredibly relevant and powerful in areas like addiction recovery, isn't it?
Absolutely. Destructive addictions are, in many ways, habits at their absolute worst, deeply ingrained, automatically triggered by powerful cues, often linked to profound emotional or psychological needs or voids.
And the sources really highlighted that forming new healthy habits is absolutely crucial for avoiding relapse and recovery. It's a core part of building a new healthy life structure. You have to replace the old patterns with new ones.
You can actively apply those principles of the habit loop we talked about, understanding the sequence of cue, routine, reward.
So first step is identifying the specific cues or triggers for the old, unhealthy habits. What time of day was it usually? Where were you? Who were you with? What were you feeling right before? Getting really specific about the trigger.
Right. Then, the crucial step. Consciously substitute a new healthy behavior or habit as the routine in response to that identified cue. And the really critical part here, just like with any habit, is that this new habit must eventually provide its own reward. It has to feel good or produce a positive outcome in some way, eventually leading you to crave the outcome of the new healthy routine, rather than the fleeting reward of the old destructive one.
And that takes time and conscious repetition, right? It's about actively rewiring those neural pathways.
Exactly. The sources gave practical tips for identifying your personal habits, both good and bad. Things like observing yourself honestly throughout the day, maybe even writing them down, noting potential triggers, even asking trusted friends or family what patterns they notice in you.
Sometimes others see our patterns more clearly than we do.
Often true. Then you evaluate. Are the outcomes of these habits genuinely serving you, or are they harming you in the long run?
And once you identify an undesirable habit loop and decide on a new healthy routine to substitute.
You focus intently on building that new behavior consistently, repeating it every time the cue appears until its positive outcome starts to become the desired reward, until a new response starts to feel more automatic, more natural than the old one. The sources really emphasize that this brain rewiring is possible through consistent, deliberate habit formation by applying these principles.
And this principle applies way beyond formal recovery context too, doesn't it? Think about a common behavior many people want to change, like stress eating unhealthy food.
Classic example.
What are the cues in your environment or your internal state that trigger reaching for the chips or the ice cream? Is it feeling stressed after work? Is it seeing a certain advertisement? Is it boredom?
And then, what healthy behavior could you consciously substitute in response to that specific cue? Maybe going for a quick walk around the block, doing a 2-minute meditation or breathing exercise, calling a supportive friend just to chat for 5 minutes.
And crucially, how can you focus on the positive feeling or the outcome of that new behavior? The sense of calm after the walk, the connection from the phone call, until that starts to become its own reward, until it becomes your new automatic fallback when that stress cue hits.
It's about consciously applying the science of habits, not just to build things like exercise routines or reading goals, but to actually build psychological and emotional resilience, to create positive feedback loops that genuinely support your well-being, especially in those moments when you're most vulnerable to falling back into the old, unhelpful patterns.
Okay, so let's try and bring it all together now. Let's recap the core actionable lessons we've managed to extract from this deep dive into our stack of sources on habit formation and failure.
All right. First and foremost, maybe the biggest takeaway is to understand that habit failure isn't necessarily some kind of moral failing on your part. It's overwhelmingly often just a result of falling into these predictable, common pitfalls.
Right, like trying to change too much too soon, focusing too much on the distant goal instead of the daily process or ritual, forgetting to consciously shape your environment to support you.
Or starting with efforts that are just way too big to sustain initially. Keeping your efforts secret, removing accountability, not tracking your progress so you can't see how far you've come or where you're struggling.
Or just trying to figure everything out entirely on your own, reinventing the wheel instead of learning from the experiences of others who've already done it.
And underpinning so many of these practical pitfalls is that critical understanding from psychology. Habits function as these automatic fallback mechanisms. They kick in, especially when our limited willpower is low because of stress, fatigue, or just cognitive overload.
And that's not a design flaw. It's how our brains conserve precious energy. But it explains why we might default to any strong habit, good or bad, when we're feeling depleted. Because overriding that automatic response requires the very willpower we lack in that moment.
Maybe the most profound lesson, though, is that the journey to building habits that truly stick, the ones that last, seems to be fundamentally about shifting your focus, moving away from just achieving outcomes and towards actively building an identity.
Becoming the type of person who naturally does the desired things because it aligns with how they see themselves. It's who they are.
And you reinforce that identity by consistently taking those tiny, achievable steps. Remember, each one is a vote for the new you, by creating supportive systems and environments around you, and by having a clear, powerful why that is deeply rooted in that desired identity.
And when you inevitably face setbacks, because you will, understanding the likely underlying reasons, like recognizing the impact of stress or depletion or unexpected environmental triggers, that understanding allows for self-compassion. And that's absolutely key to building resilience instead of just getting stuck in a cycle of guilt and shame.
A setback becomes a data point, information, not a final verdict on your character or capability.
So armed with this knowledge from the research, from the science, you really do have the power to actively identify your existing habit loops, understand your triggers, and consciously substitute new, rewarding behaviors. You can actively work to rewire your brain towards the life and the person you want to become. You can design your habits much more intentionally.
This deep dive, pulling together these insights from academic research, behavioral science writing, personal experience, hopefully it gives you a powerful shortcut, a way to understand the fundamental science behind habits and equip you with practical strategies that are grounded in that deep understanding.
And that brings us to our final provocative thought. Something for you to consider as you go forward from here. Given everything we've learned from these sources, that willpower is a finite resource, that our habits become our most likely automatic default, especially when we're stressed, tired, or overwhelmed. What would it look like to design your desired habits, your good habits, not just for the days when you feel motivated and energetic and strong, but specifically to serve as your easiest, most reliable fallback when your willpower inevitably hits rock bottom?
How can you engineer things so that your positive habits become the automatic path of least resistance, precisely when life gets genuinely hard? How do you make the good choice the lazy choice?
Something to chew on.
Until next time.